The White House made a public statement that they're only striking designated narco-terrorists, and they're lying. All of this is classified, so I cannot really go into the contents, but I've reviewed all of it, and I've reviewed the strike files themselves. And when this administration says they are only striking designated narco-terrorists, I can tell you from a review of the record, they're lying.
Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a powerful CNN investigation that exposes what really went on behind the scenes of the U.S. military's controversial campaign, Operation Southern Spear. Over the past 11 months, the administration claimed these strikes were precisely targeting high-level narco-terrorists. But as investigative journalists and lawmakers dig into the evidence, or lack thereof, a very different picture emerges. Some innocent fishermen caught in the crosshairs to low-level couriers desperate to feed their families. This report uncovers who was actually on those boats. Plus, you'll hear directly from Senator Tim Kaine, who reviewed classified strike files and boldly accuses the Pentagon of misleading the public. There is a lot to break down here, so let's see the video.
11 months ago, September 2nd, 2025, the strikes began with Operation Southern Spear. Now, in the last 24 hours, we've been told that that mission may be coming to a close, replaced by something else. Now, here at The Lead, we've been compiling victim profiles, trying to shed more light on just whom the Trump administration is targeting and killing and why. We sat down with some journalists doing the important investigative work.
They're murder victims.
That's Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine's assessment of the Trump administration's campaign targeting people that the administration calls narco-terrorists. In a letter to the White House this week, Kaine accused the Pentagon of going far beyond its original goals in Operation Southern Spear and killing people who are, quote, entirely unaware that they are marked for execution. Operation Southern Spear, which began nearly a year ago, has killed 221 people and destroyed at least 66 vessels. But the results do not seem to have been effective. U.S. Customs and Border Protection data, analyzed by the think tank the Washington Office of Latin America, does not show a meaningful decrease in cocaine seizures. During the 10 months before the boat strikes began, CBP reported seizing more than 56,000 pounds of cocaine. During the 10 months following the beginning of the boat strikes, September 2025 through June 2026, CBP's reported seizures actually increased 2%. Fentanyl, which President Trump claims this operation is targeting, is largely produced in Mexico, not Venezuela or Colombia, according to the Drug Enforcement Agency. And CNN reporting shows military officials do not always know whom they're targeting, some of whom may even be innocent. Chad Joseph and Rishi Samaru were believed to have been killed in the October 14th strike last year. Their families are suing the Trump administration for wrongful death and extrajudicial killing. The complaint says, quote, Mr. Joseph and Mr. Samaru were not members of or affiliated with drug cartels. And Trinidad's government says there's no evidence drugs were on board. Chad and Rishi's families told ACLU attorney Jeffrey Stein they were fishing and doing farm work in Venezuela and boarded a boat to get home to Trinidad.
Rishi wanted to come home to help care for his elderly mother who had fallen ill. Chad wanted to come home to see his wife and 3 young children.
In response to our request for comment on this lawsuit, the White House said, quote, all of these decisive strikes have been against designated narco-terrorists bringing deadly poison to our shores. But they have provided absolutely no evidence to back up any of the strikes. Which is not to say everyone on these boats had nothing to do with the drug trade. Some were clearly fishermen trying to make extra money.
The CNN report opens with a striking milestone. 11 months after the launch of Operation Southern Spear, the military mission is quietly shifting into a new phase. Host Jake Tapper reveals that while the administration repeatedly promised these maritime boat strikes were precision operations targeting dangerous narco-terrorists, investigative reporting tells a vastly different story about who was actually on those boats. A sharp condemnation from Senator Tim Kaine sets the tone for the investigation. Reviewing classified documents, Kaine accuses the Pentagon of exceeding its authority and conducting extrajudicial killings, pointing out that many individuals targeted and executed had no idea they were marked for death. On-screen graphics highlight a glaring disconnect between official claims and actual results. Operation Southern Spear destroyed at least 66 vessels and claimed over 220 lives, yet data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection shows cocaine seizures actually increased by 2%. Meanwhile, the DEA notes that the lethal synthetic drug fentanyl isn't even coming from these South American maritime routes. It is produced in Mexico. The reporting then puts a human face on these numbers by sharing the story of Chad Joseph and Rishi Samaru, 2 men killed in an October strike. Their families filed a wrongful death lawsuit, with local authorities and relatives confirming neither man had any cartel ties. One was a fisherman and the other a farmer, simply trying to return home to Trinidad to care for an ill parent and young children. In response, the White House issued a blanket statement claiming all targets were designated narco-terrorists, but provided no evidence to support its claims. Investigative journalists who examined 19 specific cases found a recurring tragedy. Those killed were not high-level drug kingpins, but impoverished fishermen, desperate lumber workers, and low-level couriers caught up in a military campaign operating without due process.
Sat down with 2 investigative journalists who have looked into who is being killed. They uncovered the stories of 19 of the dead.
Many of them are reporting shows are somehow involved in drug trafficking business, in drug transportation business, in very low levels of the chain.
Journalist Lorena Melendez told us one of the stories really stuck with her.
The case of Juan Carlos. He was a bus driver, and his bus damaged, and he couldn't repair it. He said, I have to do bad things, so he traveled to Trinidad.
Juan Carlos's wife told the journalistic consortium El Clip she did not want him to get on the boat, but he insisted.
I'm leaving. I can't take it anymore. What desperation. I'm leaving to live or die. But I'm leaving. That's how he told me.
She also remembered the moment she knew he'd been killed.
But since I'm making empanadas here, the phone is ringing too much. When I see an international call, I say no. Something has happened. Something happened to Juan Carlos. The mistake was seeing the video they sent me, where they were blowing up boats.
Juan Carlos was believed to have been killed in the October 3rd strike. He leaves behind 3 children and a grandchild, according to El Clip. Does that sound to you like a narco-terrorist? Another victim was a fixture of his community. Here's investigative journalist Jose Luis Peña-Redonda.
I think about a Venezuelan guy his name was Pichirilo. I managed to speak to people who knew him very well. One of them told me, just tell everyone he was a super nice guy.
Edouard Jamie, or Pichirilo, was a beloved local athlete. A family member tells El Clip he was also on the boat that was blown up on October 14th. None of these individuals seem to have even been mid-level drug traffickers. At worst, they seem like couriers. Remember when the U.S. struck what Trump called a drug submarine? There were 2 survivors. The U.S. military held them, then released them to their home countries, again raising questions about whether the Trump administration knew who they were targeting. Andres Tufina Chila was one of those 2 men. His sister told CNN he was not a criminal. Last month, the Los Angeles Times followed the stories of 8 fishermen from Mexico who vanished after the February 16th U.S. strikes. Quote, the men sometimes earned extra cash by transporting gasoline to the high seas, where they would refill speedboats ferrying cocaine from South America. They were all killed. A mass was held for the men at sea a few days later. This video provided by the LA Times shows mourners drinking beer and singing songs. There are many more of these stories from Mexico, Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia, and Trinidad and Tobago. Maybe couriers caught in the crosshairs of the Trump administration's so far fruitless quest to end drug trafficking, often going after the lowest on the chain. Men who felt they had no other choice and were executed by the United States.
In this compelling segment, CNN turns its attention directly to the human cost of the boat strikes, featuring investigative journalists who spent months uncovering the true identities of those killed. Rather than high-level cartel leaders, the reporting reveals that the casualties were overwhelmingly low-level workers, impoverished laborers, and individuals who ended up on these boats out of sheer economic desperation. Journalist Lina Melendez shares the tragic story of Juan Carlos, a Venezuelan bus driver who found himself in an impossible financial situation after damaging his boss's vehicle. Unable to pay for the repairs, he made the agonizing decision to travel to Trinidad to seek work. His wife recounted his desperate final words before leaving. "I can't take it anymore. I'm leaving to live or die." She described the horrifying moment she learned of his death, not through official notification, but by receiving viral video footage showing the strike that blew up his boat, leaving behind 3 children and a grandchild. The investigation then highlights another victim, Eduard Jaime, known affectionately in his local community as Picherillo. Journalist José Luis Peña spoke with those who knew him, painting a picture not of a hardened criminal, but of a beloved local athlete and fixture of his neighborhood. Like many others targeted in these strikes, Jaime was at worst operating on the absolute lowest rung of drug transportation, far from the high-value narco-terrorist targets the administration claimed to be pursuing. CNN's reporting further emphasizes this pattern through stories from across the region, including Ecuadorian fishermen and Mexican workers who earned extra income simply refueling speedboats. Whether these men were innocent bystanders or low-level couriers, none were given due process or trials, raising profound legal and humanitarian questions about a campaign that executed men driven by poverty rather than cartel power.
Executed without trial, we should note. As Monday night became Tuesday this week, Southern Command announced that Joint Task Force Southern Spear was ending, and it would be replaced by Joint Task Force Western Hemisphere. We asked the Pentagon if they knew who they were targeting during Southern Spear. They maintain, quote, targeting decisions are deliberate, based on comprehensive assessments and reviewed through established processes. Every narco-terrorist killed in the Department of War operations was an affiliated member of a designated terrorist organization actively transporting illicit material. Again, we asked for evidence, and they provided none.
The report transitions into a major tactical shift by the Department of Defense, as U.S. Southern Command officially announces the conclusion of Operation Southern Spear. In its place, military leadership unveils a new multi-nation mandate known as Joint Task Force Western Hemisphere, which expands operations across 18 partner nations in the Americas Counter-Cartel Coalition. Despite changing the operational name and structure, the core controversy surrounding target selection remains unaddressed. When CNN pressed the Pentagon directly on whether military commanders actually verified the identities of those on board prior to authorizing deadly boat strikes, officials issued a firm, formal statement defending their actions. The Pentagon insists that every targeting decision was deliberate, based on comprehensive intelligence assessments and thoroughly vetted through established review processes. According to official Defense Department statements, every individual killed during these maritime operations was an affiliated member of a designated terrorist organization who was actively transporting illicit material to U.S. shores. However, as host Jake Tapper highlights, the military's official response stands in sharp contrast to the reality on the ground. Despite repeated requests from journalists, lawmakers, and human rights organizations, the Pentagon has provided zero evidence to corroborate its claims that those killed were active narco-terrorists. This total absence of transparent proof reinforces the critical findings of investigative journalists and legal advocates. Instead of high-level cartel operatives, the evidence consistently points to low-level couriers, local laborers, and innocent fishermen caught in international waters, raising severe legal questions about extrajudicial strikes conducted without due process.
Senator, first, any word from the White House since you sent that letter we referred to at the top of the piece?
Jake, good to be with you. The White House made a public statement that they're only striking designated narco-terrorists, and they're lying. I have been looking at every bit of this, from the original presidential directive in July to the legal opinion issued by the Department of Justice authorizing military operations in September, to the Department of Defense targeting criteria in October. All of this is classified, so I cannot really go into the contents, but I've reviewed all of it, and I've reviewed the strike files themselves. And when this administration says they are only striking designated narco-terrorists, I can tell you from a review of the record, they're lying. And the one thing I can tell you about the targeting criteria is what's not in the targeting criteria. And this stunned me when I finally was able to get it and review it. The Department of Defense does not require any evidence that the boats they are striking contain any narcotics. They could have had that as one of the targeting criteria. I can't tell you what the criteria are, but I feel able to tell you what they're not. They could have included a criteria that we will only strike craft that are carrying narcotics. They chose not to do that, and so they are striking boats and killing people far beyond what the president's directive was and far beyond what the White House and Pentagon spokespeople are saying they were doing.
I mean, they're obviously killing low-level drug dealers. You're not on a speedboat in the Caribbean delivering drugs if you're high up in a cartel. What are you hearing about this new mission as Southern Spear comes to a close and this Western Hemisphere Joint Task Force starts? I guess it has 18 member nations.
Jake, but first I want to say, yes, some of these killed might have been low level, but I believe that many of them killed were not even that. I think
absolutely.
The Guardian has had some really good reporting about the bombing of fishing craft in Ecuadorian waters. And so we're not even talking about low-level drug folks here. So here's what we know.
Well, and let me just add to that, if I can, Senator. Those 18 Mexican fishermen who also delivered gasoline to boats, or eight Mexican fishermen who delivered gasoline to boats. I mean, they're delivering, the worst thing they're accused of doing is delivering gasoline to drug boats of
Correct.
low-level people, and they were killed.
Yeah, for delivering gasoline. Yeah. So here's what we know, and there's much we don't know. I met with the head of Southern Command in June and was aware since then the last strike taken under Southern Spear was taken on June 21. And so there's been a pause for 6 weeks with no strikes taken under Southern Spear. Earlier this week, the Pentagon announced the ending of Southern Spear. It's over, thank God. I think it never should have been done. It's over. But what we now have is an 18-nation counter-narcotics collaboration. We want to go against narcotics, and we want to be collaborating with other nations. What I don't yet know is what are the military targeting criteria, if any, that they'll use. But I have a hard time believing that 18 nations will sign on to an indiscriminate rogue killing campaign. And so I'm going to get to the bottom of what the new rules are. But the fact that other nations are participating, and you'll recall Secretary Rubio announced a multi-nation effort to combat narco-trafficking a couple of months ago. That is a good idea, so long as we're not forcing our troops to engage in killing folks with no due process far beyond what the legal rationale and justification suggests they can do.
The broadcast shifts to an in-depth interview with Virginia Senator Tim Kaine, a key member of the Senate Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committees, who recently authored a damning letter to the White House regarding Operation Southern Spear. When asked whether the White House responded to his letter, Senator Kaine states that while the administration publicly insists it is only targeting designated narco-terrorists, his review of classified strike files reveals a starkly different truth. Having examined the complete chain of authority, from the presidential directive to the Department of Justice's legal opinion and the Pentagon's targeting criteria, Kaine asserts directly that the White House is lying about the scope and legality of these operations. Senator Kaine reveals a startling flaw within the classified targeting rules. The Department of Defense does not require any evidence that a targeted boat actually contains narcotics before authorizing a deadly strike. Because military commanders chose to omit actual drug possession from their strike criteria, the military has been executing individuals who have no connection to drug trafficking whatsoever. Jake Tapper pushes back, noting that even if some targets are involved, high-level cartel bosses are not the ones driving speedboats across open waters. Senator Kaine agrees, pointing to independent reporting on attacks against Ecuadorian fishing vessels and Mexican gasoline couriers. He argues these individuals are not high-ranking operatives or even mid-level dealers, but desperate workers caught in an indiscriminate killing campaign operating without due process. Looking ahead to the end of Southern Spear and the launch of the new 18-nation coalition, Kaine expresses relief that the previous operation has concluded. His first-hand review of classified strike files confirms what journalists on the ground have uncovered. The administration's narrative does not match reality. By revealing that the Pentagon's own targeting criteria required no actual proof of narcotics on board, Senator Kaine exposes a profound breakdown in military accountability that resulted in the deaths of innocent fishermen and desperate low-level laborers. As Operation Southern Spear comes to an end and shifts into a new multi-nation coalition, the core questions surrounding transparency, legal authorization, and human rights remain as urgent as ever. This CNN report serves as a crucial check on executive power, highlighting the ongoing effort by lawmakers and journalists to demand accountability for those lost in the crosshairs. That brings us to the end of today's deep dive into this major national security investigation. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this breakdown insightful, please hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more daily news analysis and in-depth political reporting.